Hey everybody, it's Pastor Vern for June 17th, 2020. One day closer to being together again. And I've had some interesting experiences lately. We've been getting out a little more than we were with some of the eased restrictions. And I had someone who was kind of looking at me the other day, and it's like, I wonder who that is, kind of a look on their face. And when I said something to them, they realized that who I was. And they said, boy, I tell you, this COVID thing has really changed a lot of people's appearance. And I says, really? I hadn't thought about that too much. So I went back to look, and this is a pre-COVID picture. I get it up here pretty good. I don't know. I don't see a lot of change. Do you? Maybe a little bit. But it's kind of interesting as you get back into seeing people again that we're realizing that there has been changes during this time. Some for the better and some maybe not so much. But we have all been changed by the experience. And as we get ready to get back to worship together, let us remember that we come together as a people with a common experience of the COVID pandemic, and that it is that we have just another thing that brings us together in our relationship, is that we've all dealt with that. We're going to go with another requested word today. It's called winnowing. Winnowing is a process that was used in ancient days. Well, actually, it's still used in some parts of the Mideast now, in very much the same way that it was done in Jesus's time. It's a process where you take thrashed grain. Now, they thrash grain in different ways. They may bring wheat into what they call the thrashing floor. They would lay the wheat out and have animals actually walk across. Then what it would do is it would break open the seed heads, the pods that wheat or mainly were grown in. Would break them open so that it would start to separate. The grain would start to come out. If you ever looked at the head of wheat, you see that each kernel has got its own little wrapping around it that protects it, allows it to develop inside that wrapping. And in order to use that grain, we need to get rid of what we call the chaff. The chaff is kind of what's left from the separation process when you take away all the straw and all that stuff. And there's grain and there's chaff left. Well, the winnowing was a process in which you would have a place that was laid out, something that was very solid, or else a cloth, or possibly some other kind of container. And the way to get the chaff out of the grain is to, when you have a nice breeze, is you would take a device and throw it up in the air. And as you threw it up in the air with something like what we would call a scoop shovel, we would throw it up in the air, and as the breeze would take the lighter chaff away, the grain would fall back to the ground. And after you go through that process a couple times, you've gotten rid of most of the chaff, and now that grain's ready to store and or use to be ground into flour for making bread or other purposes, I suppose. And it was just that process of separation of those parts that were not usable for food to the parts that were. It's kind of the separation of the heart of the plant from the rest of it. And in this context that the person asked me about, they'd seen it in the context of how God works in our lives. It's also a metaphor for removing the unneeded things out of our lives and the evil out of our lives. And also God uses it as a metaphor for separating those who have accepted Christ, those who have laid open their hearts to the Holy Spirit entering, compared to those who haven't. Is that those who have done that, their hearts are heavy with the joy of having a relationship with the Lord, and if you would go through the winnowing process, the others would maybe drift away while God's people would be gathered together on the threshing floor or on the cloth or whatever you're using to collect the grain. So it's really interesting context, the way that especially Jesus would use these common day events that people would be well aware of in order to link that into relationships with God. He did that on a lot of his stories. There's a lot of metaphors in Jesus's teaching. There's a lot of hyperbole in Jesus's teaching, and to make a point to have us think about how maybe those daily things that we go about, how also our life is can be like that, like being separated from the chaff. Some of the other ones are things about whether a tree blossoms or it withers and dies. There's a lot of different combinations in the scriptures that Jesus used. So that's our word for today and our time together. Take good care of each other. Watch out for one another the best you can. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.